Welcome to the R.E.A.L Health and Nutrition Christmas podcast special. How exciting is this, Max?
Yeah, it feels weird doing an actual intro again.
Yeah, absolutely. Max, before we jumped on this call, you were talking about the controversies surrounding Christmas and nutrition in general. Tell me a little bit about what we're going to discuss in this podcast today.
Yeah, look, I think with our opinions, Matthew, we're always middle of the road, pretty much with everything, really. I don't think we have any extreme opinions on, we probably do, but none that I can think of off the top of my head we have extreme opinions on. And I feel like Christmas is, again, one where we're very in the middle, and we may have differing views, I'm not sure, but I feel like we're pretty aligned overall, in the sense that what I mean by that is you basically have two camps, one being like, no, you must not have a day off ever. You must, on Christmas Day, if you go to the lunch, you must bring your meal prep, and if you're not having your chicken and broccoli, you're a loser. And then the other end is like, yeah, like Christmas Day, I'll think of it like Christmas month, and I just eat whatever I want for the whole month, and
Christmas
yay.
year.
it's my Christmas year.
Yeah.
So and we're in the middle, right? And I feel like that's the case for pretty much everything.
I think I would have some pretty extreme views, especially for aged care and elderly support. I think our nutrition guidelines are, to be honest, not amazing, and the support that we provide our individuals in this kind of aged care settings can be dramatically improved upon. But that's a whole nother topic for another time. Well, I guess you could definitely relate it to this kind of topic, being that, of course, if you have family members in that situation, you're probably going to be saying hello over this Christmas break or something similar. So something to consider as well. But apart from that,
exactly.
most of the time we're pretty balanced in our approach, or at least we think we are, because we're just going off what the literature suggests and what the evidence supports.
Yeah, that, as well as, I guess, using your own common sense also, I feel like, as well. That seems a bit maybe patronizing in a way, but understand that, like, well, you know, most of the time doing something in the middle is going to be the best way to go.
Depends on the scenario, but yeah, absolutely. So in terms of today's podcast, talking about how people approach the holiday periods, Christmas in particular, the Australian culture around that, dieting around the Christmas period, if it's appropriate, if it's not, your prior experience, Max, with specifically bodybuilding and the Christmas period, because I think that'd be really interesting to talk about. Let's take it away. You already started the conversation with different approaches to holiday periods. You got the two major extremes, as with anything that we ever talk about. There's either one people on the opposite end of the camp, and then you got the complete other end of the entire world. Let's talk about the hardcore sport performance bodybuilding master who nails every single calorie, macronutrient, micronutrient that has ever existed and is completely across the literature. What does someone like that do?
Yeah, awesome question, dude. I think, in my opinion, I've thought about this a lot because I feel like it is a really interesting topic to sort of think over in your head. And I think it really matters on quite a few factors. One of the most important, first one being the amount of experience you have. So if you're very experienced, you very likely, what comes with that is you very likely know your boundaries and your limits and the things you can do before you burn out. So what I mean by that is that if you're very new to the whole thing of bodybuilding, it's very easy to burn yourself out and burn the candle at both ends. It's a very taxing sport, whatever you want to call it, pageant thing. I like to refer to it as a pageant personally. But you don't know, you burn out very easily. And so what can happen is that you might think of the Christmas time, be like, no, I'm so hardcore, I'm gonna push through, I'm not gonna relax at all over the Christmas period. And then come, January the 20th or February 15th, some random day, you burn out and you don't train for the next 2 to 4 weeks because you're just too cooked because you never actually had a break. Whereas if you had had like a 2-day break back in December, back in Christmas, you wouldn't have needed that 2 weeks off, if that makes sense. So like the trade-off wasn't there. The reason why I bring up the experience thing is because if you're very experienced, you probably have a good understanding of whether you're going to be close to needing a break or not, or close to burning out or not. And then from that's going to determine how you might want to go about your Christmas period. If you're extremely disciplined, you have an extreme goal of that you want to be this amazing athlete by this year, then potentially the reality is if you are sticking to everything over Christmas and nailing everything over Christmas, just like any other day, just like August the 10th, then you potentially are gaining a little bit of extra advantage over your competition. that's a reality. If you're neck and neck with your competition, those couple of days could actually make somewhat of a difference. Is it likely to be in theory it does? In reality, probably not. But at least in theory, it's going to make a difference. However, I think that's really unlikely to play out in the real world. I think what's best is pretty much for everyone to have a little bit of time off, whether it be relax on the eating a bit, relax on the training a bit. I'd say the training can probably stay the same. What do you think, Matt? Do you think training can stay the same?
I think training is a whole separate aspect of kind of your health journey, your health schedule during the week. I think training aids in so much of stress management that it's kind of like your baseline. That should be what you kind of refer to as like the normal that goes on. I think the hardcore dieting side and the specific nutrition management can be a little bit more food noise, can be a little more stressful in that situation, and provides maybe a little bit more necessity for the every now and then kind of break or maintenance period, which I think is more appropriately in terms of what we would generally refer to and talk about. I think it's important to note, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the general pop, but difference between maintenance, a full break, and going full cheat mode. Not that we really like those terms anyways, but yeah.
Love it. Yeah, so because the reason why I asked you, because in my opinion, training should pretty much stay the same any time of the year, because the reality is it's like an hour out of your day, an hour and a half max out of your day. That's not a big deal, dude. Like if you're on holidays, just get up an hour and a half before everyone else, go train and come home, and you can just live like normal. No one will ever know what you ever did. It's not that big of a deal. So I think that there's no reason for the training to differ too much. I always line it up personally to have my deloads over Christmas. That's obvious. The 25th to the 1st is literally 1 week. Pretty perfect for a deload week, in my opinion. So I always just line it up, shuffle things around, line it up to have a deload week over Christmas, and happy days. Like the sessions take 20 minutes, not even. So I think that's perfect. Whereas the nutrition, as you were saying, it's a bit more nuanced. You can't, unlike the training, it's not just like you get it done first thing in the morning and then you got the whole day off. It's more like, well, you still got to eat throughout the whole day. So it's a lot more balanced, and it takes a lot more actual thinking rather than just prescribe yourself to go train early in the morning, which doesn't take any thinking at all.
Absolutely. Unless you're doing some very strange version of intermittent fasting where it's like now the breakfast only group. I think out of everyone who I've ever met, I don't think I've ever met a client who does just breakfast. Yet. I'm sure there's people out there.
Yeah. It's because breakfast is so easy to miss.
Yeah. It's a busy time in the morning. It's a busy time of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And also humans are so, it seems to be maybe Western culture, I'm not sure, but it seems like every single person no one eats breakfast. It's like we're so adapt, whatever the word is, to not, everyone's fine not consuming breakfast. I'm fine. I don't. Anyway, let's not talk about myself.
But Max, the autophagy and the intermittent fasting and the big buzzwords.
I'm never going to get cancer, bro. Never.
Stay tuned for our next 3 podcasts. We'll be talking about intermittent fasting and reasonings behind it and potential new data that's come out recently. That's pretty interesting. But jumping back onto your Christmas chat, Max, deload week. Explain what a deload is to some of these normal people who don't understand extreme bodybuilding sciences.
Cool. Yeah. So essentially, it's just a matter of recognizing when your body needs a break. And the reality is your body will need a break at some point. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So there's a whole bunch of symptoms. There's a whole long list of symptoms that you may experience, you may not experience, that your body's telling you, hey, I need a break right now. And this isn't a thing of like, oh, you've stuffed up. Because sometimes people might think about it. I've spoken to clients like this before. They think about it like, oh, if you need a deload week, you've done something wrong because you shouldn't need the deload week. It's almost the opposite. It's almost a really good indication of I've been training hard, I've been training enough, and now it's time for my body to rest. And it's essentially, just to explain what it is, it's just a week of doing a lot less. You're deloading the amount you're doing. It could be a bunch of different ways that you might deload. Typically, it's reducing the amount of sets you're doing, so the amount of volume you're doing overall. It could be reducing the weight of the exercises. So if you're squatting 100 kilos, you might squat 60 kilos, 50 kilos, 80 kilos, something like that. And it could be they're reducing the number of reps per set as well.
Mm-hmm. And forgive me if I'm wrong, Max, but I guess the idea behind why you need a deload is because you gain systemic fatigue, meaning whole body fatigue via neurological and kind of just general cellular processes where your body has to adapt to that over time. It eventually gets to a point where kind of need to take a break. Otherwise, you're potentially reducing the efficiency of that kind of hypertrophy process, or potentially dramatically increasing the risk of injury. I think that's generally my understanding. Would you agree?
Yeah, there's so many reasons why deloading is amazing and something that's super necessary and more beneficial than not deloading. I think that's the important thing to get across as well. It's superior to not deloading. That's the objective reality here.
Yeah.
And the good thing is, whilst deloading is quite a contentious subject overall, the actual act of deloading is not contentious. No one argues against deloading, saying that you shouldn't do it. It's more what's contentious is how you should go about it, or how long you should do it for, or how frequently you should do it. They're kind of the things that people argue about, not exactly whether you should or shouldn't do it. That's everyone's across the board is saying like, yeah, you should probably deload decently frequently. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Injury risk, total systemic fatigue, but probably the biggest one, and one of the big warning, like, how I was saying there's a list of reasons when to know when to deload, is purely performance. So if you're not getting stronger, massive red flags. Oh, am I really fatigued right now? Why am I not getting stronger? Why 2 sessions in a row, or last week I didn't, I've gotten weaker since last week. That's one of your biggest warning flags. So it's not even like a thing of like, I'm doing it to prevent injuries, which is 100% a case. It's I'm doing it so I can continue to get stronger. Because if I just kept going, I'm just going to get weaker and weaker because I keep getting more and more fatigued. So that's probably your biggest one as well, so that you can actually gain muscle.
Absolutely.
And get stronger.
And would you say this applies to just the bodybuilding population, or would it apply to cyclists and like AFL players and things like hobby sport individuals, athletes of general variety, endurance sports? Is it kind of across everyone, or is it just specific populations?
Yeah, awesome, man. Yeah, great question. So as you said, it is a systemic thing. So it is a systemic, like full body systemic. So very much focus on bodybuilders, strength athletes overall, like resistance training athletes overall, Olympic lifters, obviously. But it can extend to other athletes, so like marathon runners, etc. It's just going to look differently. It's just not going to be as similar, but there's going to be similar veins of it. It's going to be that similar theme of a period of, because essentially what the broad theme of a deload is a period of time when you're doing less total work to reduce fatigue and bring yourself back to a sort of a baseline level, so that you can start work again, and that fatigue will rise subsequently.
So it's probably less applicable to something like a seasonal sport, where it's like you play basketball for a season and then you play AFL or something along those lines.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. And I guess with those sorts of things, so like with a basketball or a footy, like I guess the goal is that rather than have like a deload week as per se, because you're not just going to take a week off from playing basketball, it would be more of like, we need to manage it a lot better. So we need to have like days off. So, it's easy in a bodybuilding scenario because you've got long breaks. You can just give yourself a week off every now and again, or a deload week. Whereas with footy, because you've got to play next week, you've got to manage a lot better. So you might say like, okay, every single Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, or whatever it is, I'm 100% resting to give myself that mini break so that I'll be fine for next week. And that's what they all do. Like that's the obvious way to go about it. So instead of having whole weeks off, they always have like half weeks or, a couple of days off to rest up and recoup.
I think that's generally a really good guideline. I think the one outlier that comes to mind is these Eastern European and kind of Russian type UFC fighters who train like 7 days a week, as much as they can, so much more than potentially their Western European, Western American counterparts, where it's they're kind of dominating the field when they get into this kind of mentality.
They do.
I wonder if that's like an entire different, I guess, so many different variables in that situation, or if it's just the factor of like the amount of total load that they're training more than the other individuals. Do you have any thoughts and opinions on that one?
I do, man. Yeah. So with this, it's super interesting in the sense that there's so many variables to look at with this one. So one of the first ones that comes to mind is that we absolutely do see these guys dominating 100%. But you know what else we don't see is we don't potentially see all the people, and there could be, I'm not sure, I'm just purely speculating here, all people that are potentially super injured or didn't make it because it was just too much volume. We're potentially seeing the upper echelon of people who have the genetic capacity, because that's a reality. Some people can handle more, where they can just handle a whole lot of volume, a whole lot of, reps is the word. I guess I'm just using it because I'm a dumb person who has a small vocabulary. A whole lot of reps in the gyms, in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms, or whatever. I'm not up with the UFC lingo. Yeah, so like we're potentially seeing those guys, the guys that can handle that and perform well under that. We're not seeing, because we don't see it, right? Because they don't succeed. So we're not seeing all the guys that have failed because their body just can't withstand that amount of volume and pressure. There's a lot of stuff coming out of Russia, and like there was also super high volume studies that came out of Russia from like a bodybuilding standpoint. I don't know how to not get Vladimir Putin to kill me.
Approach it very delicately, otherwise there might be their version of the Secret Service in your doorstep relatively soon.
Yeah, there's just I wouldn't hold a whole lot to account from Russian folklore and Russian studies and stuff like that. It's not the pinnacle of credibility.
Sure thing. So from the same perspective of like potentially some countries may hyperinflate their studies to potentially, yeah, okay. I can understand a perspective of that.
There was a German one. I think it was like a German volume training or something like that. It was like super wacky as well.
But you find that everywhere in sport. It's some people trying to make names for themselves, massaging the data in a way that potentially might influence some other outcomes. It's really tricky. That's probably my next thing to do is understand and how to analyze data. Ugh, boring, but it needs to be done. Absolutely.
100%. And the reality is it makes sense. So if I was, let's say I was lucky enough to, my brother was a amazing UFC fighter, world champion, right? And he kept promoting me. He was like, oh no, it's all because of my dietitian. And then I was like, well, the best way to market myself is to not say, yeah, look, I just did what like Australian Guide to Healthy Eating says, because then everyone's like, oh, okay, like you just did the regular stuff. If I was like, no, I've got this secret thing, like we eat this at this time, we do this for this amount of calories and blah, blah, blah.
He does the real program, he plans
then everyone's like,
yeah,
exactly. Then everyone's like, damn, this guy like knows the secret, like he knows it. So like same as these guys that I'm not saying they don't know stuff, because like they obviously know a lot, super high knowledge, but it does look good rather than just saying like, yeah, like we just do pretty much what everyone else does. He's just really good. Like his super athlete. If we make ourselves sound cool by being like, we did this at this time, blah, blah, then everyone's like, damn, he knows the secret. That's the reason why he's so good, because of me, not because of his abilities.
Very interesting. So, you raised such a great point with the difference in genetic potential that I think sometimes that we factor that in, or don't factor that in for normal people as well. So when we go on Instagram, when it's like some bloke who was 400 kilos drops down to like 120 and he looks amazing. And then it's like, oh, if I can do it, you can do it. And I was, no, not necessarily, because he's an N of one. He's a study of one. He's a single individual who's had a specific situation that's worked for him. Like, yes, there's definitely things that we can take away from it, but copying exactly the same thing. Like, if, for example, if I did exactly the same workouts, exactly the same nutrition, exactly the same sleep and stress management lifestyle as Chris Bumstead, one of the best bodybuilders of all time at this point, if I did everything exactly copying it, I'm still not going to look like Chris Bumstead. I'm going to look amazing and it arguably really, really impressive. But there may be a difference in terms of my ability to handle certain supplements that are special in that kind of nature, if you know what I'm talking about. 100%. There's differences in my ability to respond to that kind of thing. There's differences in my ability to respond to that kind of hypertrophy training stimulus. I think the inter-individual variability is something that's huge as a factor in sport performance, bodybuilding, body composition, and more so for the general population, how we manage and how we adapt to specific stimulus for weight loss and for weight management, for the general health protocols and points that we would like to adjust. Remember to check the link in the description or our website for our consultations. Back to it.
Yeah, 100%, man. And I always say this to my clients, that the pros and cons. The cons is that you can't change your genetics at all. But the pro is that no matter what, like if you put in the work, you're going to see great results anyway. Doesn't matter who you are.
Absolutely. I love the saying, genetics loads the gun, your lifestyle pulls the trigger. So even if you have a predisposition to something along those lines, you can definitely work your way around that situation.
Yeah. And the genetics probably just determines what types of gun it is.
Whether it's like a little spud gun versus an absolute tank. Yeah. So yeah, like that's pretty much the summary from like a bodybuilding point of view, is that it can be a good opportunity to get ahead slightly in theory. In reality, it's probably not going to do anything anyway. You know, a couple of extra days ain't going to do much. And you got to understand that if you do hold strong throughout that period, I'd be really careful about burning out. I think it would be really, really
nerve-wracking for me if I was coaching someone and they were like, no, I want to go hardcore throughout the Christmas period. I want to stay the exact same. I'd be scared of like, damn, I think mentally you're not in a very balanced position right now. Because if you're that set in your ways of like, you must stay the exact same no matter what day it is, then mentally you're very tough. And that could be fine. Mental toughness is good, but mentally tough people also break. They're not very pliable.
Yeah, there's not a little bit of a fizzle. It's more of like the entire world cracks in half kind of situation.
Yeah. And now if you're competing in season A, so season A is in March, or this is the last thing I'll finish up with, Matt. If you're competing in season A, which is like March, April of every year, which would mean that you almost definitely need to be dieting throughout the period, I would look at it. Well, firstly, you've decided to compete in season A, so it's your decision to do that. And you should have known the consequences of that was that it's going to be tricky over the Christmas period. And I would seriously look at taking that more extreme approach, because the reality is you're only 12 to 16 weeks out at that point. And having like a thing of, okay, I've got a Christmas lunch. I'll relax on the Christmas lunch, eat whatever I want during the Christmas lunch with my family. And then outside of that, I'm on it for the rest of the time. That's something that I would recommend for people and for my clients. Because the reality is if you didn't want to be strict over the Christmas period, don't choose season A. Compete in season B. Like, it's literally your choice. Season B is in September and October. There's nothing then. There's no big events during that period. Mm-hmm. So that's, for me, it's like a pretty simple. Like, it might sound harsh, but it's like it's your choice.
Yeah,
you chose it for a reason.
Just acknowledging that there are pros and cons to every situation, and if missing out on that kind of Christmas break, kind of mental break as well, is a big con that you factor into your training and lifestyle, then I think it's something to consider.
Yeah, 100%, exactly. And unfortunately, this sounds harsh, but unfortunately, if you did choose season A and you didn't realize that you were going to need to be dieting over the Christmas period, like I don't know, pull out or something. I don't know, like it's kind of like tough luck. Like you should have planned ahead. You should be more organized in that kind of thing.
You mentioned, Max, in terms of our ability to manage the stress and the kind of the situations of that Christmas period, how does that apply to our general approach? Like, let's say I'm a normal person looking to. It's quite interesting how we say normal, but let's say I'm an average person. Same thing. It's just this. Yeah. I'm an average person looking to maintain my health over the Christmas period, but I've noticed over the past few years, like I'm starting to gain a little bit of weight around that Christmas period, and I tend to gain it at that time, and I don't really seem to lose it throughout the year, so it's just a gain every year. How do I manage this Christmas period to work towards my goals?
Man, that is an awesome question. I love it. Yeah, I would say, the first thing is you're going to need to have a look at what's different about the Christmas period versus the other periods throughout the year. And that's probably a pretty obvious question, right? Like, there's a lot of things that are different, but I guess nailing it more down, like, what's different from a nutrition perspective? Why am I, I'm sure there's other periods throughout the year where you're having decent amounts of celebration. Potentially you've gone on holidays, or potentially you've had like an Easter break or like a birthday break or whatever it is. Did you gain weight during those periods? And if not, like, why are you specifically gaining weight around Christmas? I'm really interested, Matt, because I don't really have a particular answer, like a silver bullet answer. During those days, on the 25th, 26th, 27th, if someone's noticing they're eating a lot and they're finding it really difficult to control portion sizes and all that, what's your recommendation for people like that?
We need to zoom out and look at the entire month. So often I find it's people focus on just the Christmas itself, in that it's, I have Christmas and I have like a couple of family events and I eat so much on that Christmas that I gain 4 kilos over just the Christmas, like just that single 25th of December. In reality,
that would be impossible.
Absolutely. And that's, I'm very open-minded, but look, from a physics perspective and just understanding thermodynamics to a very entry-level position, that's not how it works. If we look over the entire month, then we need to factor in, we've got more family events usually going on. We've got more relaxation. Our schedule is different because we're taking time off of work usually. In terms of Christmas events, if you work at a Christmas-oriented location, being most of the Western world, there's going to be multiple events going on. I myself have had 5 different Christmas parties that I've been invited to. I was only able to make it to maybe 2 or 3 of them because of priorities. That's okay, Max. You were invited to my Christmas party. You can come along. That sounds good. In terms of...
Are we going to have a company Christmas party?
We can have a company Christmas party. We'll have a little bit of a Zoom chat after this. We'll celebrate with a bit of eggnog or something, or like a low-calorie sweetened drink or something like that. Over the entire month, it's very different to your normal day-to-day life. We have a lot of variability going on. You now have a complete change of lifestyle. We see that even if you go from working 5 days a week to working 0 days a week, going into retirement, that's a complete change of characteristics. That's a change of physical activity. That's a change of your nutrition availability. Hence some people go from potentially having a very quick lunch where they just shove food into their mouth and then go throughout the rest of the day because they're very busy people, to getting into retirement or going on holidays for a short period of time and now having the entire day to have nutrition available to them. We have not built up those really appropriate satiety and hunger cues that we're aware of, that our stomach is sending the right signals to our brain and we're interpreting that correctly. Often I find that it's the entire month, if not the entire holiday period, that's potentially adding on our calories on average a little bit every single day, to the point where we're gaining 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 kilos in that Christmas period. And then your maintenance stays over that for the next year or so. You may drop a little bit, but we're seeing that gradual increase over time. And it's not just the Christmas day by itself. So you bringing your Tupperware to Christmas day and thinking everything's going to be okay. We need to look at the entire month, the entire year. What's everything else that's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, man, I love it. While you're speaking then, I just had a really interesting idea. It really seems like a simulation of one of the biggest things that when we talk to clients who have entered retirement or semi-retirement, they often speak about gaining weight. And there's a discussion that Matthew and I have spoken about this very frequently around about, well, why are they gaining weight? And lots of the clients blame it on their metabolism. They go, oh, my metabolism slowed down because I'm older. And it's kind of like, well, look, maybe it has decreased a little bit because you've lost muscle, but also you've stopped working, which means especially if you had an active job, you're a lot less active. And just like you were saying, you have access to food almost all day long and you're a lot less busy too. So it's like there's this whole tornado of things that have just come together, which has resulted in you. It's like the perfect storm. That's what I was looking for, not tornado. The perfect storm to create this atmosphere that's conducive to gaining weight. Like if you were going to set up someone to gain weight, you'd have access to hyper palatable foods that are really yum, lots of time to eat them, and not much to do throughout the day because you've just entered retirement. So you're not used to having the days free. That's kind of like, that's how I would set someone up to gain weight. I'm sure you would too. So it's like,
it's a perfect environment.
Of course yeah. And less active. So you're going to be losing muscle and not doing much. You're just sitting on the couch the whole day. So they're kind of the discussions we have, less brutal, obviously, with clients around that. And you know what, Matthew, it kind of sounds like to me, that sounds like a bit of a simulation of retirement over the Christmas period.
Look, absolutely. It's a short time that we are having a very similar experience towards what our retirement would be. And look, metabolism is a whole nother conversation to have. Look, actually, no, I could summarize it in a single sentence. Metabolism is the amount of energy that let's say you use on a daily basis. Yes, it does go down with your age, but it typically goes down with a direct correlation with muscle mass. When you lose muscle mass, your basal metabolic rate drops, your metabolism drops. Yes, there are other factors that go into that scenario, but overall, muscle mass is predominantly the major factor in this specific instance.
It's the main thing that's variable.
Yes, the main variable factor.
Yeah. So there are other things that matter a lot, like the amount of organ mass you have, but that's not going to be changing very much, whereas the muscle mass can actually change quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess you could argue that heart mass can change a fair bit by variability, but that's also a muscle, so that's kind of a bit of a grey area. Getting a bit too nerdy in the
PEDs.
Science. Yeah.
Hypertrophy that heart.
Yeah, ultra endurance, absolute insane people. But for the majority of like the kind of average person who's going to the holiday period, they're like, how do I actually manage this? How do I approach a situation that's appropriate and work towards my goals? And there's a few different approaches that we can go through. So there's the absolute ends of the spectrum. So you're going to see people on Instagram and on TikTok and all these stupid websites where it's, you need to cut everything from your Christmas. You need to kill your family, and you need to move to Alaska, and then you need to Chris Hansen everything. And then like you can't even look at a carbohydrate in the rest of your life. Not realizing that vegetables also carbohydrates. Yeah, absolutely. Individual.
Muppet.
Then you've got the absolute opposite of, you shouldn't worry about food at all. You shouldn't even think about food as anything that has nutrients in it. You should just think about food of, oh yeah, yummy dopamine. We're definitely in the middle, in the sense that, look, we're looking out for your health, but also need to acknowledge that your health is not just physical, it's mental as well. So we need to balance and find a path that works for you in this period. Often it includes a period of time where we just need to acknowledge what's going on in our lives. Have we reduced our physical activity? If we're normally a tradie that works 5 days a week, really hard, out in the sun all day, moving physically a lot, and then we go to this Christmas period and then it's just complete relaxation, and to the point where we're on the couch and completely vegged out. Perfectly fine to have a break every now and then. But acknowledging that if we're not doing some physical activity, we're going to be losing muscle mass and we're not burning as much energy on a daily basis. And then we have an increased availability of food over that period. Which specific one or combination of those is the major factors leading to your weight change over that period of time? Sitting down and being aware of that can be really important and really a major factor in this scenario. I would very much encourage everyone listening to this conversation to be acknowledged and aware of your hunger cues. Often, and we've spoken about this before, Max, and we'll speak about it in the future in terms of our approach to hunger cues. During your bodybuilding period, you said to me specifically, Matt, I want to be a robot and not acknowledge my hunger cues because it's just numbers to me and I need to get the numbers to reach my goals. That's perfectly fine if you're a robot. Fine. Not everyone can be a robot, and then it depends on your situation. But for majority of people, being aware of when you're starving, when you're hungry, when you're neutral, when you're satiated, and when you're bursting are all major important things to be aware of during this time.
100%.
And replicating your standard kind of day-to-day dietary intake can be important in this scenario.
Yeah,
there's a lot that goes on. We'd have to have a full consultation with you to actually identify what your specific area of interest or potential barrier to your success is. But I think it's such a major thing to be considerate about, and especially over this holiday period when we have the increased availability of those hyper-palatable, calorie-dense foods.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the more on top of that, so like the follow on is, understanding when you're those things. So when you're starving, when you're hungry, when you're satiated, when you're bursting, that's great. But then understanding also what your reaction is to that. So like that's kind of like the natural follow on. So for me, I know personally when I'm absolutely starving, I overeat every single time without fail. So if I allow myself to get super starving, I eat way too much food. And so I go from starving to bursting. I never go from starving to like, oh yeah, I'm decently full, I could stop right now. I just always overeat. So it's great to recognize that and go like, okay, let's try and not allow myself to get into positions where I'm starving. Let's try and only allow myself to get into positions where I'm like, okay, I'm decently hungry, but nothing insane. Because then I go from decently hungry to like, yeah, I'm pretty full. Like I'll stop now. Like no worries at all. And that works really well for me. That's something that's great for me. And I'd say that's pretty typical. Just about every single client I've spoken to has always said once they get starving, they tend to overeat crazily, because I think that's just a natural human.
Yeah, it makes sense from an evolution perspective. Is if you're starving, meaning that your body has now started to break down the materials that make up your body, especially the fat stores and the muscle stores, which I think once you get to that starving point, it kind of gets in the get a little bit sketchy. Yeah. If you're starving, it makes sense for your body to want to increase the amount of energy, the amount of calories, the amount of kilojoules you're intaking at that one point in time, because it needs to get you out of that mode. That's an emergency mode where it's like, I need to have food or I'll bite your fucking head off. And we can have a chat about how it ranges depending on the individual.
Bad, usually.
Yeah. Look, it's a tricky scenario, something definitely to be considerate of.
Yeah, Yeah. So, yeah, your response to that is also super important. You know, do you get to starving and then you only eat a little bit? Like that could be an option for you. Again, and even following on from that, I actually like to have this bad desire. I like allowing myself to get starving. It's fun. Like you get super starving and you eat a whole bunch of food. Like it's like it's enjoyable for me, which is bad. Like that's not something that's necessarily a good thing. And like it's bad to admit that, but like it's true.
It can be. Look, there's pros and cons, but overall, as long as I guess it's on a daily average that you're getting the energy, the micronutrients, the availability of nutrients overall, there's a lot of things worse that could happen.
I guess I'm just teetering with like poor eating habits overall. Like the better eating habits would be to have smaller, frequent meals rather than like one big meal.
Potentially. Yeah. But that's also another thing that it depends on the individual. So I find that some of my clients really struggle to have multiple meals throughout the day without overeating at all those meals, even with acknowledging the hunger cues, even with acknowledging how to approach that strategy. Sometimes the awareness of those hunger cues and separating that habitual habit of ignoring them and having an appropriate response being potentially increasing the time that we're having that meal so we can be aware of those situations, not having the desire to continue eating or potentially ignoring all those factors and just enjoying the food so much that we're not acknowledging our hunger cues in the slightest, even if we're bursting. 100%. Sometimes it can be a position of, hey, one single meal is the go-to for this specific individual. Now, is this going to be beneficial from an energy balance throughout the day perspective? No. A blood glucose management perspective? No. A sport performance perspective, supplying your muscles and your energy and your I guess your whole body with enough fuel throughout the day to kind of keep it going? No. It's not the best, but if it works for you for a total body composition perspective, then of course that's obviously the way to go for you.
Quick ad break, guys. Remember to click the first link in the description to check out our dietitian consultations and services. Back to it.
Yeah. And also, I just like to pause for a second because this is almost the epitome of what we like to say we do, which is like tailor it to the individual client. You know, every single dietitian out there knows that small frequent meals is better, but I wouldn't be comfortable in saying every single dietitian is going to allow on an individual basis to go, you know what, for this client, we know it's not the best, but let's start this person off with larger infrequent meals and try and wean and change some things so that we can get to that end goal of small frequent meals. You know, I love what you said so much because it's like it goes against what we've been taught a lot, but it's about being realistic and individual to the client. And if we've tried and tried and tried to do these small frequent meals and it's not working, I think you're just beating a dead horse at that point. And that's why I love what you said so much, because it's just like you're so stuck in your ways you can't even think to be like, okay, let's move a little bit outside of the box here to try and rejig something and figure something out in the long term. So yeah, that was awesome. Really well said.
I've had that conversation with a couple of potential peers of dietitians and allied health professionals in general, where it's, if you know what is the optimal route to addressing this specific disease, condition, state of mind, position of the person's life, do you just prescribe that optimal approach, or do you potentially go a little bit left of field and into more of a potential hypothetical instance? So I had a conversation about the potential for keto and its treatment for IBD, irritable bowel disease. Right. Inflammatory bowel disease and things like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, not necessarily for our general population and the Christmas talk, but it's an interesting thing where it's, if you've tried everything, there's no harm in trying some other things as long as you manage the other variables and the cons to the best of your ability. So going on a keto diet, you're going to be at risk of multiple micronutrient deficiencies as well as potential cardiovascular risk. Can you adjust it so that it's more of a low carb diet? Can you adjust it so that if it is keto, you're including those micronutrients? Can you manage that in an appropriate manner where you're actually providing your body with the things it needs to prevent the development of further chronic disease later down the line? I think personalization and tailoring your specific dietary strategy and lifestyle strategy to your specific situation is the absolute key. There's no one size fits all. And if anybody tells you, oh, all you need to do is do XYZ over Christmas and you're not going to have any problems, tell them they're an absolute idiot because we need to acknowledge what your life is, not what someone else's personal experience has been in their own personal life. That's an N of one. That's not tailored to you.
100%. Exactly. And we've harped on about how much genetic variance is a reality. You know, we probably speak about it every single podcast, I reckon. And it's the exact same when it comes to this as well. The reality is because genetic variance is so variable, there's going to be some people out there that do function best, or like they operate best on just that one meal a day, one big meal a day. And that is a reality. And as Matt was saying, it's not optimal, but that's just how they function best. And it might be no matter how hard you try or how much you do, that could just be the way they go about it. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily endorsing that and recommending that that's what they should do, but there is a lot of genetic variance out there.
Absolutely. And on the topic of variability, how do we approach the holiday season? So in terms of my specific approach to the holiday season, I treat it similar to what my normal day-to-day would be. So there's often times where I'm going to events or specific dinners or something along those lines where I acknowledge that Christmas in particular, that entire 24-hour, 48 period can be quite energy dense. But my personal, I guess you could almost argue set point, although we can argue set point theory at a later date. You could argue my almost set point would be for a kind of a calorie maintenance around my current body composition. I don't really need to focus too much on that, but I've specifically built up some really strong habits around that kind of environment that really support my goals overall. So specifically acknowledging my own hunger cues has been a major factor in terms of determining how much energy I need and how much energy I require. Over my day-to-day, I go through prioritizing some whole foods first, always whole food first approach, high fiber, nutrient dense, adequate protein intake, a bunch of healthy fats from polyunsaturated and monounsaturated sources with, of course, you can allow for saturated fat sources as well. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it needs to be factored in. Once I've ticked those off, then it allows for a little bit more discretionary. Does that mean I can only have a single chocolate bar or 2 chocolate bars on a daily basis and then everything else has to be perfect? No. Going into the Christmas period, specifically on like the 25th of December, there's going to be a lot more discretion in there. It tends to happen, a lot more calorie intake, but then over kind of that entire month period, you generally adapt to that situation. And it depends on your specific scenario, but I find majority of people, if they're following a similar mentality of being aware of what they're having those hunger cues available, and more importantly, how to act around those hunger cues, it can be really important overall for our movement towards. Max, do you have any comments before I keep going?
Yeah, no, look, I think that's great. I think that's something that could be, look, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say it's a bit more of like an advanced tool in the sense that it does require a good ability of understanding what your hunger cues are, which can take quite a long time. It can be quite a journey to understand them, especially if you've had a lifetime, which most people have, of ignoring them, and you've had parents who force you to ignore them. One of the strategies I think you'd agree with, would be trying to fill up on your less calorie dense foods, which are most likely going to be available to you at Christmas. You know, there's most likely going to be salads and plates of vegetables and options for you that are going to allow you to fill up on these foods, which are going to mean that once it comes time to eating the foods that, you know, as you were saying, discretionary choices, much less likely to eat up significant volume of them. You might still have quite a lot of them, but the volume, the chance of you overeating if you're already full is severely reduced than the chance of you overeating if you're starving and the first thing you're starting out with is your chocolates and your lollies. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of what that looks like, low energy density or low calorie density foods tends to be things like your fruit and veg and potentially some grains and things along those lines. So you've got broccoli, lettuce, carrots, asparagus, pretty much most of those types of ingredients. Fruits tend to be really amazing at all. I don't really need to go through a list of fruits. I think most people understand that one. Another one that can be really great to prioritize is the lean meats. So something like the Christmas ham, which you may think is, that's such a naughty thing, Max. I can't have a Christmas ham. That's ridiculous. You can absolutely have Christmas ham, especially because it's a relatively lean meat, which unless you, of course, are eating the fat, cutting off the fat can be something that you consider. But again, I wouldn't hyper obsess over, I need to cut off that fat because it's potentially bad for my cardiovascular health and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, look, it's totally fine in small amounts. But if you're factoring in potentially you have elevated cholesterol and you're aiming for some improved cardiometabolic outcomes, then maybe cutting off might be beneficial for you. But again, you don't have to hyper obsess like, I can't have a single gram of it on my ham, otherwise it's going to be over, because there is saturated fat throughout the meat. It's not just a lean protein source. It can be absolutely tricky. But
really prioritizing kind of the basics of Australian Guide to Healthy Eating tends to align with what our opinions are, not the other way around. And then moving forward from that is a really great point. So really, really great suggestion there, Max. I apologize. My point is a little bit more of an advanced kind of like, hey, this is a broad picture. But again, if you're having a little bit more discretionary on the Christmas day, does not matter. If you're having a little bit more discretionary every now and then, does not matter. But over that month period, over the next couple months period, how does the rest of your dietary lifestyle look like? Is it a potentially a one-off abnormality, or is it more of like a, hey, this is a consistent every single day kind of thing? Because I think that's what some people get caught up in, is that they think it's just the Christmas day, but it seems to be it's almost, hey, it's not just the Christmas day, it's the extra 50, 30, 200 calories on a daily basis can lead to massive significant changes over that extended period of time.
100%. Exactly. Yeah, no, completely agree. And it's super common for, similar to how we've got the example of people that get elderly and their decrease in function over time. Matthew's discussed a few times over the podcast how if you take two points 10 years apart, it could look like it, and then you just draw a straight line, it could look like their function has slowly declined over time. However, when we actually take a closer deep dive, it's more likely that instead of it being a constant slow decline, it's more like a pretty much flat line, and then event happened in like a fall, and then it decreases, and then flat line, and then so it's like a staircase. And you could almost think, not again, this isn't like I'm stating pure fact. I'm just kind of putting things out there that you could almost think that similar from a weight gain perspective for a lot of people, in the sense that instead of having 2 points over your lifetime, from 20 years old to 50 years old, and just assuming the weight gain was linear, you could nearly look at it like throughout the year, you'll pretty much stay the same weight. Christmas bumped up a little bit, and then again, same weight. Christmas, same weight. Oh, point being is that throughout the year, you might actually be staying the same weight, and you just feel like you're constantly gaining weight, but you're not. It's just every Christmas you're gaining 2 or 3 kilos consistently.
It's quite interesting. I find that it may not be just the Christmas period. I think it's potentially more of like a trigger of, hey, this is now kind of your daily lifestyle, and it's more of like a habit reset, potentially in the opposite way of working towards your goals, working against your goals in some instances. Yeah, it can be a bit of a tricky period of time, but I think focusing on those, like, hey, enjoy yourself. You can still have those types of foods. You don't need to cut them out, but acknowledging that, hey, you need certain types of foods for your body to function well. You need to make sure that you're having your healthy fats, you're having your micronutrients from your wide and diverse plant and vegetable sources and meat sources as well. You need to make sure they're having enough variety as well from different sources. You can't just have just sweet potato and think, oh yeah, I've got my vitamin A, everything else is sorted. There's a little bit more complications in that. But of course, I think the Christmas period is a really great time to engage in some physical activity as a family, as a kind of a joint unit, in the sense that, hey, do you want to go play some tennis? Do you want to go for a walk afterwards? How do I enjoy my time and spend time with family and friends, but not center it around food, which I think is a very difficult thing to do. But I think it's potentially a move towards a really positive direction of incorporating some really good family and bonding time around something that isn't centered around lunch, dinner, or breakfast, or brunch.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. I think I've got one last thing to say, and then I think we'll do a little bit of a summary and we'll finish up.
Yeah.
Easy peasy. The last thing I had to say, which this might sound a bit like controversial, but this is probably my one but I've had a few controversial takes, but this is probably one of the bigger ones. I think Christmas is a little bit of a scary time for me, in my opinion. Reason being is I think it can really create some yo-yo dieters. I think it can really give birth to. Reason being is because if you do gain a little bit of weight, and the problem is the yo-yo cycle is so easy to get in, and it's quite difficult to get out of as well, because it just like sucks you in. The gravity pull of it is crazy. And the reason being, this is a very realistic thing that could happen to people and will happen. Like someone, at least one person, a non-zero number of people will experience this coming year, is that they'll gain weight over Christmas, an amount of weight they didn't want, 2-3 kilos. It doesn't need to be much, but they have the inclination to be hyper aware of that, and they go, oh, I really want to lose that weight. Okay, let's diet super hard for the next 3 weeks, and I'm going to lose that 3 kilos that I gained over Christmas. And then that was a really, really hard diet. And then once the diet finishes, oh man, I'm so cooked. I just want to eat a little bit of food. And then it comes back up. And literally you've hit the cycle of that. You've hit like after your diet, you feel awful, so you just want to eat again, and then you feel really guilty about eating again, and then you just diet again, and then it's like literally just up and down, up and down, up and down, and the yo-yos might get bigger, over time. Who knows? So I think there is a bit of scariness and like fear around that. Well, like it's very easy to enter that cycle if you not allow yourself. It's very easy to get caught up in that cycle.
Absolutely. And we'll be talking more about that in our next podcast, featuring around New Year's and holiday period and how we approach that environment. So it'll be a really good conversation to have. But if we were to summarize our position on Christmas as a whole, Max, would you like to take away the summary?
Look, I think the summary is going to be balanced overall. Really, really balanced. So, there's going to be little strategies you can implement, really trying to focus on asking yourself questions that, Matthew was talking about before. Am I hungry right now? Am I full right now? Why am I eating this right now? Is it because I'm hungry? Is it because I enjoy it? What's asking yourself these basic questions can be something that's a positive thing if it's done, again, in moderation. If you're obsessing about it, if you're thinking about going to the fridge and you ask yourself 10 times, why am I going to the fridge? That's probably not a good thing. And then, doing basic things like, obviously filling up on the veggies is going to be a good thing. Potentially, there's going to be so many strategies you could implement, and there's probably going to be some that will work for you, won't work for you. Matthew brought up the great point of trying to exercise more, understanding that you're likely working less and potentially exercising less because you're working less or having a break. And that might be a good opportunity to start exercising more to still keep active and keep burning calories throughout. So there's going to be so many strategies you could implement, and it's going to be a matter of balancing, still staying strict with your goals and still not completely blowing it, whilst also giving yourself the break that you probably need and will be conducive to allowing yourself to be good for the next few months until you need another break after that.
Absolutely. I think it's important that over this kind of holiday period, you really focus on what your goal is. If you don't have a goal established, it's really difficult to do it just for the sake of it. It's like, I guess it's kind of like healthy for me a little bit. It's like, no, I specifically don't want to have a heart attack. I specifically want to live till I'm 99. I specifically want to make sure I'm healthy over this Christmas period, and establishing that, then you can establish a plan that works for you. And that's generally how we approach our conversations as well with our clientele. And if you do need additional support, reach out to us. We're happy to have a chat and support you over this Christmas break. I acknowledge that not a lot of people will focus on their health and nutrition around this time of period, but I think it's an important thing to acknowledge that sometimes this is now the turning point between you on a potentially a healthy, balanced lifestyle and potentially something that's gone a little bit down the slide, a little bit more so in the sense that it's spiraled down out of our control. And gaining that control is really important.
Agreed, man. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people, I don't think we've seen this personally, but I do have the feeling that a lot of people really write off this period. So they go, from the 20-something to the first, I'm just going to do whatever I want because it'll be fun. And then they really try and lock in after the first. It's just teetering. It's just playing with fire. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's not like the end of the world going to give you cancer or anything like that. But it's just being less. There's the reward you get from that, I guess, is that you feel like, I can just relax. I can just chill out. No rules. We can just do whatever we want. And I guess the problem would be even stepping back. And I think you'd agree with this, Matthew. Why do we feel like that in the first place? Why is there this need and this like pressure on our shoulders that like, I feel so fed up with everything right now, and I feel so overworked right now that I need to have this period where I just completely just let go of everything. That doesn't seem like it's very sustainable for me if you need those periods. It's
a really tricky scenario, and that probably brings us back to one of the previous podcasts on work-life balance and ensuring that balance is, again, a balance and not necessarily a kind of a ball to the wall all the time. But it can be very tricky. So in summary, for our position, enjoy your holidays, whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you celebrate. Have a good time, relax a little bit, but of course, keep in mind what you're working towards and how that specific holiday period can be a benefit to you, especially from a mental health aspect, instead of working against your long-term goals.
100%.
Beautiful.
Everyone, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.
See you just before the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay tuned. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to the R.E.A.L Health and Nutrition podcast. The sponsor of today's show is you. You support this show by listening and using our services of dietitian consultations and performance coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one consultations to help you achieve your health and performance goals. Any random bloke online can give you a generic meal plan where we here at R.E.A.L work collaboratively with you to reach your goals, making you feel heard and including you in your journey's planning. Our service offers tailored advice and can accompany meal plans and or realistic nutrition strategies, which can be booked via our website, www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. That's www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. Just a quick disclaimer, this podcast is for education, information, and general entertainment purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medical nutrition therapy or healthcare of any discipline. The content discussed in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute of professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please review our terms of use via our website. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.